Okay. Okay, folks, I'm going to start now. First, welcome to everyone. I'm Gordon Porter, the Director of Inclusive Education Canada. We're very pleased you've joined us for this webinar today. Inclusive Education Canada is a national NGO focused on supporting Canadian schools to be inclusive. Our initial focus has been the obstacles that have existed for children with intellectual and developmental disabilities. However, accessible, equitable, and effective education will only be achieved when we create a school culture where every child belongs and where teachers and other educational staff are fully supported in their work. School leaders, specifically school principals, play a critical role in this process. Thus, our webinar today. Inclusive Education Canada aims to bring together the various stakeholders who must engage in this work. Please check out our website for information, a website, I might add, that'll soon be updated and improved. I'm also pleased to tell you that Inclusive Education Canada will be launching a website designed for educators and parents who want to learn about foundational ideas connected to building inclusive schools and classroom. This site is due to be launched in February and is provisionally named Source for Inclusive Education. And it's a Canadian-oriented project. We look forward to sharing information on this site with you in the weeks ahead. Inclusive Education Canada recognizes the pivotal role of school leaders in fostering inclusive environments where all students, regardless of their learning needs, can thrive. This includes students with diverse learning styles, abilities, and backgrounds. Supporting principals with resources and professional learning opportunities is essential because they steer the school toward a positive and enriching learning environment for each student, regardless of differences. School leaders are uniquely placed to create an environment that's welcoming and celebrates differences. For students with diverse learning needs, school leaders ensure that teachers are supported to utilize different teaching and learning methods so that every student experiences success. A working group of our Inclusive Education Canada associates developed the publication we're officially launching today. Each of you will have received a PDF copy of School Principals Leading the Way to Inclusive Schools. It's also on our website. Two of our associates led this working group, and I want to introduce them to you now. Donna McGee Richmond is an associate professor in educational psychology and leadership studies in the Faculty of Education at the University of Victoria in British Columbia. Her teaching and research focus on teacher development and the intersection between teacher knowledge, beliefs, pedagogy, and student learning outcomes in inclusive classrooms. Donna has extensive teaching, clinical, and research experience using instructional and assistive technologies to enable student engagement. She has particular expertise with students who have multiple and significant disabilities and who use assistive technology and augmentative and alternative ways of communicating. Thank you for joining us, Donna. Secondly, Steve Sider, the other co-chair of our working group. Steve is a professor and associate dean in the Faculty of Education at Wilfrid Laurier University in Waterloo, Ontario, where he teaches courses in school leadership and inclusive education. Steve was a school administrator, a special education teacher, consultant, and classroom teacher for 15 years before joining the university faculty. He's the inaugural director of the Center for Leading Research in Education, an interdisciplinary research center at Laurier. Donna and Steve will guide us through looking at the publication that we've shared with you and the the insights they have about principals and the journey to inclusive schooling. Steve and Donna, over to you.
Thanks, Gordon. Thanks for joining us, everyone. It's great to be part of an event like this that crosses this country. So what Donna and I are going to do is take just a few minutes to position the document to, first of all, talk a little bit about why inclusion in schools and classrooms matter, and then the role of the principal and what we know from some of the research that we've been engaged with. And don't worry, if you are here because you'd like to hear from the people who are in the field in the principal's offices, you're going to hear from them in a few minutes as well. So we're just going to start by talking a little bit about the context for this. And I'm going to start by just reminding everyone, we know that across Canada, in provinces and territories, the various jurisdictions in which we work, that one of the reasons why we're engaged with inclusive education is because of the legal frameworks within which we work. The Council of Ministers of Education 15 years ago said that inclusive education is quality education that aims at the full participation of all learners. So we know there's provincial and certainly within districts or jurisdictions, school boards, there's guidelines, there's regulations. And we also know that there are frameworks that exist outside of our country or outside of our provinces and territories that also informs inclusive education. So as Gordon has said, the focus of this document, we recognize that inclusion is a broad term with learners of varying and intersecting aspects of identity, including gender and socioeconomic background, sexual orientation, religion or faith, language, and certainly disability. And the interest we had particularly for this document was on the inclusion of students with disabilities. So in addition, let me say this, and then Donna, I'm going to pass it over to you, is I'd like to know more about how inclusive education benefits all students beyond the legal things, the technical things we have to do as school administrators. So in addition to those legal expectations that happen in our provinces, what might be less clear for us in Canada, because we work in a federal system where education is a provincial responsibility, we sometimes forget that inclusive education doesn't just occur in our jurisdiction or in our province, but it is informed, it's framed by documents that exist outside of our jurisdictions and certainly outside of Canada. Probably many of you are familiar with the Sustainable Development Goals, and SDG 4 specifically talks about inclusive education, equitable and inclusive education. It's a framework that governments around the world agree to or have agreed to in 2015. We're 7 years away from supposedly seeing those targets reached. And so inclusive education is an aspect of that. Beyond that, there are a number of conventions, the Conventions on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities from 15 years ago, 2006, the Convention on the Rights of the Child from about 35 years ago, which also have framed the reason we engage with inclusive education in our provincial boundaries. And certainly one more that I'll point out that some of you will be familiar with is the Salamanca Statement, the framework and action on supporting students with special education needs. So it's important to note in our diverse global context that these international agreements frame, they inform, they certainly direct the support for inclusive education, whether that's in high resource communities or low resource communities. So in principals training programs, we tend to focus on these legal aspects. But there's compelling evidence that speaks to the benefit of inclusive education. And Donna, I'm going to turn it over to you to speak to that.
Thanks, Steve. Thank you so much, Gordon, for the introduction, and Steve for your framing the sort of the political legal reasons why we do what we do. In the past 35, 40 years, there's been an incredible amount of research that has gone into taking a look at, well, what is inclusive education and what does that look like in a school? And I'm just going to tease out a few of the pieces of that. You will find quite a bit of that research in the document that we've developed and that is up on the website. So I'm just going to tease out a few bits that have been that resonate with me. When I look at the students and the teachers who I've worked with as a researcher, as an instructor, and as a colleague, and also as someone who has worked with students with significant disabilities, many of those students were included in regular classrooms. And in the beginning, the teachers really struggled with that. And change is really, really challenging. It's a hard thing to do. I think one of the components that really strikes me is the collaborative nature of inclusion. No teacher can do this by themselves, no family member, no consultant, no principal. So that's kind of what this webinar is about too. It's bringing you together as leaders within your schools to really examine and to share your experiences in inclusive education. Some of the research that is being demystified is, educational settings that promote support inclusion are more successful for all students. So in many ways, it is good instructional practice that we are promoting. Whether students have been formally identified or not, chances are some of the strategies that are used in those classrooms is going to be good for other students, whether they have a disability or not. It's just good instructional practice. Students with disabilities in inclusive classrooms gain academically as well as socially. They do not detract from the other students in the classroom. That's been a myth that has been demystified. And teachers who have adopted inclusive teaching approaches, they're able to improve academic standards for all students. We now have in our backpacks, in our briefcases, in our filing cabinets, we have a lot of resources, a lot of instructional practice, universal design for learning, differentiated instruction. We didn't have much of this 40, 35 years ago. We now have these instructional practices that will support all students. Assistive technologies. We are now technologically driven society, really. And there are a lot of very, very good resources out there for teachers. I'm not going to go into those. Many of them are in the brochure. What else did I want to say? When I look at inclusive education, I think one of the key components is collaboration. So getting back to what I said originally or in the beginning, no one teacher can do this on their own, nor should they be expected to do this on their own. So it's really, really important that a collaborative culture be fostered and be supported as well when teachers are looking at, well, how do I support this particular student? I never worked with a student like this before. I have no idea what to do. So it really is the teacher that it really requires that teacher be able to speak up, to say that the school is a safe place to say that, and to receive the support that they need. It's not easy. Change is never easy. Think about some of the changes you've made in your life, whether it's personally or professionally. It's like, oh my goodness, how do I do this? Many teachers are asking that question. So it's important as leaders, as a leadership team, which, would include the principals, the vice principal, the administration, the learning support teachers, resource teachers, whatever they are called in particular school districts across Canada. It's important that leadership team provide that space, that safe space for teachers to raise their hand, to say, I'm sorry, I've never done this before. I need help. And that help be there to support them. Because chances are they're not the only one. They just have the courage to say, I need help. I think that's all I want to say about that. I'm going to talk a little bit more about collaborative practice in the next section.
Maybe we can talk a little bit about that right now, Donna.
Sure,
so what we want to do is take a moment to talk a little bit more about some of the research that is identified in the document. And I'll just start with a quick comment here about healthy, authentic inclusion in schools. Yeah. Leighton Schnellert at University of British Columbia calls this the ecology of learning communities. I really like that phrase, the ecology of learning communities, a vibrant, living community where everyone has and adds value. So from 2017 to 2021, Donna and I and a number of other researchers from across Canada, from University of Victoria in the West to Memorial University in the East, were involved with a study it's funded by the federal government, exploring the competencies of principals who foster inclusive school cultures. And the study involved 285 principals and vice principals from every province and territory in the country: English, French, urban, suburban, rural, north, from the north and so forth. And to our knowledge, it was the largest interprovincial study investigating the role that principals have with fostering inclusive education. When we identified the use of the word competency, it's important to understand that we understood competencies to be skills, knowledge, and attitudes or values that leaders access in their work. So it might not surprise you in the study that we found that principals were able to identify skills that they use on a regular basis: effective communication, fostering collaborative communities of practice. And these are not difficult to learn. We can all learn these types of skills. The second area, those knowledge competencies, knowledge of policies, of procedures, of instructional practices. Again, not difficult to learn. Skills and knowledge are often the focus of principal preparation programs. But what we found, and somewhat in a different vein, was that what was really a challenge for many principals had to do with that value of inclusion and agency. And that relationships are harder to nurture, but absolutely critical for successful inclusive education to take place. So how do we help shape those attitudes of school leaders towards inclusion? Because we know that the modeling of school leaders affects everyone else in that school community, whether that's teachers, support workers, bus drivers, the people in the office, the people helping keep the school clean, and so forth. And yet what's interesting is, even though we know that attitudes are significant, very little time in principal preparation programs is used to explicitly address attitudes, values, and beliefs. So decades of research points to the fact that these attitudes, our attitudes towards inclusive education, they're like water in a well. So when we draw from that well for our day-to-day practices as principals, we're drawing those attitudes, those affirming attitudes, those attitudes that will support the agency of teachers and of students. The bucket that brings up that water those are just the skills and knowledge. Those are easy to help harness. The attitudes that water, that's what we really want to aim for. So the research on the role of principals in creating and promoting inclusive schools is pretty clear. Principals make a massive difference in determining whether a child and their family authentically belongs in a class or school. Donna, do you want to add to that before we go to our principals?
Sure. Just really quickly. I totally agree with you, Steve, on that. I think just getting back to the attitudes and beliefs, teachers have attitudes and beliefs that they bring to their practice. If they've never worked with a student who has a particular special need, then their belief is, oh my goodness, their belief goes back to what they think they know about that child or that particular disability, and it may not be accurate. Also, in my role in my graduate program, working with students at the graduate level, working with practicing teachers in our certificate and diploma program, over and over, when I ask them what one of the barriers is, they say time. There's no time for us to work together. I know so-and-so down the hallway is doing this in a good way, but I haven't been able to get to that person. I haven't been able to sit down and do that planning together with them. So I can't emphasize enough the importance of having teachers work with each other. They are learning as they go, and they're learning within their practice, which is the best kind of learning, really. It's embedded within their daily practice. They want to be able to do lesson planning with each other in a school. They want to be able to, when a teacher goes on professional development, they're looking for time to be able to connect or different means to connect with that teacher on what they learned and how can I incorporate that into my practice. So time is a huge one. It comes up over and over. We have no time. There's no space for us to meet together, to do planning, to learn from each other. Inclusion is not just about the students. It's about teachers being included together, along with a leadership team, being supported by a leadership team that is supporting them in their ongoing learning, that is fully embedded in their everyday practice. I think that's all I want to say right now.
So I think we're going to introduce our principals now, Donna, and this is exciting. We have three wonderful colleagues with us today. And I'm going to introduce Al, and then Donna, I think you're going to introduce Mark, and then Gordon, I think we'll turn it to you to introduce Anya. So let me start with Al Simoes. Al, you'll see on the screen here, well, wherever Al is on your particular screen. Al, it's great to have you here. Al is a principal in the Waterloo Catholic District School Board. He's also a part-time instructor in the areas of special and inclusive education here at Wilfrid Laurier University. He's been an administrator for 21 years and also was a special education teacher earlier in his career. He's passionate about inclusion and embraces the belief that all students can learn, and aligns his actions as a principal with that principle. So Al, it's great to have you here. Donna?
Hi, thank you, Steve. I'm here to introduce Mark Kasher, who is a principal at Dunsmuir Middle School being grades 6 to 8 in School District 62 here on the island, which is just west of Victoria, out in Souk. It's located in Souk. Mark is also passionate about inclusion, and we are excited to have him here to share his thoughts, his insights, experience, etc. Welcome, Mark.
Tanya Whitney's from New Brunswick. Tanya very recently retired as principal of a middle school, but she's previously worked in an Indigenous school setting. She worked in a K-8 school where she managed significant transition towards inclusive education. Most of her career has been as a teacher and principal, but she's worked at the district level and at the Ministry of Education level, building capacity and supporting inclusion. And we're very pleased that she's joined us today. Steve.
Yeah, so I think what we've asked each of of our principal guests to do is to share some points, some critical ideas, some insights that you have gleaned from your experience and that is reflected in the pamphlet that's been distributed. So I think we're just going to go in the order that you were introduced. So Al, then Mark, then Tanya, a couple minutes each, if that's okay.
Thank you so much, Steve, for the introduction. Really appreciate the kind words and what you've said. As Steve has shared, I do have a passion for inclusion education, being involved in the system for over 30 years. I've seen it develop over the years where in the past, placement has been where students have been in other settings in the school to where we are now, where we make sure the first placement is always in the classroom. And that should be seen as soon as you walk into a school. For instance, when you walk into my school, what you read, what you see in the hallways, murals, posters, should reflect inclusion education. For instance, we have a mural that's set up with our mission statement that talks about how everyone is different. However, we're all the same. Just reflecting those ideas of the inclusion principles. But it also should be reflected in your Twitter, if you have that in your school, pictures, images showing inclusion in action, and also in your policies. For instance, in your handbook, there should be comments or principles laid out about what inclusion education is all about. And you also will have to make sure that it's also reflected in how you deal with behaviors in the school. It's important you always look at the mitigating circumstances. So for instance, did the student know what he or she was doing before that happened? Just the idea how, not everyone is equal, but you have to look at each circumstance. So again, just the idea of how someone should walk into your school, they should see inclusion everywhere. And you also, as was said earlier on, the idea of collaboration, how everybody working together. So in my school, we do allow time for in-school meetings where the principal is able to join the team, because the principal is an important part, because the principal has to ensure the accountability piece is there to ensure what's on the IEP, the modifications and accommodations are done, because after all, the principal is the only one that signs the IEP. So it's important that the principal also participates in the meetings with the teachers. And what I found very, very effective is allow that time to allow during instructional time, if you have the capability of having an extra teacher that has administration time, to allow that time for that teacher to meet. That seems to work in many of my schools that I've had. What's also important too is the relationship with the parents. I'm a big believer in having our parents as close to you as you can. So in my schools, what you'll see is we'll regularly meet with their families just to check up on them. And also the teacher will have the opportunity and the school just to give the families an update. So having them close by, making sure communication is always clear and up to date, I find it is very, very effective. Again, some other key points that I've written down here that I think is also important is remember, we want to encourage independence with all of our students. And we want to eventually fade that independence as they progress in our education system. And I do feel that it's important that everyone knows their roles in order to ensure that happens. So for instance, when an education assistant walks into the classroom, you'll see, first of all, in schedules, I never put down the EA and the student. The EA goes in the room to support that classroom, all of the students. Sometimes that EA needs to support a particular student, but you'll not see that on the schedule, okay? So it's important the EA, when they come into the room, that they're downloaded by the classroom teacher about what they're supposed to do, okay? That's their role. And the classroom teacher obviously will ask the EA how things went with the student, because they have to assess and evaluate. So knowing your roles, what you need to do, I think it's so key, because that prevents any miscommunication. And again, the principal has to be involved. You have to ensure that everyone does know their roles right from the beginning and what the responsibilities are, so everything's really clear. So ensuring that is really, really important. Again, and I know in Ontario, de-streaming has been happening in many of our high schools. And again, we're heading towards where we want to use modification as a last resort. We want to ensure that all universal design, differentiation learning has been used to its fullest effect before we even look at modification. I think that's very important. And I know I'm saying a lot, but I'll say one more thing, if that's okay, is that as a school leader, school improvement planning is so important. In your school improvement plan, you should have a pillar about inclusion, belonging. And if you're looking at our school improvement plans, you'll see strategies about what the school will do to ensure that's been done. And also plans outlining what happens if it's not being done. Okay, because that school improvement is what leads the school in academic, mental well-being, and every aspect of important. Okay. Thank you for allowing me to share.
That's great. Thank you, Al. Mark, we'll just keep rolling over to you.
Okay. Hello, it's a privilege to be a part of this group. I am coming from just outside Victoria, the traditional territories of the Coast Salish peoples. And again, it's an honor to be able to speak to all of you today. I'll take a broad look at some of the ideas and things that I think support inclusion and that make it work. And one piece is, and as a principal in a school, I'm just one piece that makes this happen. It is through other people that things come to life inside of Dunsmuir and any other school that I've been a part of. And those other people include the board office, where we have an outstanding inclusive education department and team that empower me as a principal with the resources that I need to be able to make inclusion work. It starts at the top and filters its way all the way through. Part of the team, when we get the balance right around meaningful, authentic and durable inclusion for students, we're working side by side with parents, with external team members that are supporting that child in the community and at home. We're working with all of our EAs and inclusive education teachers, and in a very team approach with a collaborative nature. Some things that our district has put in place, and I think we need to acknowledge that it's not me that finds the money. We do have some collaboration time for our teachers to meet with case managers or EAs to work towards inclusion, and specifically students who are on IEPs and need additional support. So I really want to emphasize that team approach. Some strategies that I use as a principal in the school is I think engagement is really, really important. So when and where possible, I try to get out of the office and work alongside the EAs, work alongside the teachers, learn from them, work with the students. And that engagement is what helps me, and real authentic engagement is what helps me understand what barriers might be getting in the way in terms of inclusion. And we're constantly confronted with challenges in every system. And for me, that engagement on the ground with folks, learning from them, talking with them, is what helps me identify barriers and try to remove them. Dr. Ross Green says kids do well if they can, and I think that's true of adults, and that's true of the staff. That's true of me. So my job is to figure out, as it pertains to inclusion, I believe teachers and EAs and will do well if they can. So how do we support them? How do we support them along the journey and taking steps towards inclusion? It's really, really important. And Donna had spoken about the environment that you create in the school. Is it a safe place to take risks, to identify, I'm not sure what to do here. I haven't experienced this before. And that is the job of the school leader, to create that environment and create the notion that it's really important to me. A student that is in Division 6-1 is not that teacher's student. It is our student. It's all of our students. They have an extended team outside of that teacher, and we all have a role to play. And even the board office will come in through inclusion coaches and in different facets when we are struggling and trying to identify some things that could help move us forward. It's just that notion that that's our student and we all have a role to play. So for me, it's that collective team, including parents, including community members. And having inclusion for me it's deliberate, it's authentic, it's meaningful, and it's purposeful. It's not just something it's not just, that's it, you're in the square rectangular classroom for 5.5 hours with 28 other students. That's not what every child needs. So I look at, we used to have programs in the system I work in. We used to have a Skills for Life program, or we would have a behavior program, or we would have, language is super important to me. I don't speak of programs. I speak of modalities of support. And every student in the school has access to a variety of modalities of support. Not just these students get to go there or have to go there. So different modalities of support, and there's a large variety of them. And that's the language that I use to help foster an inclusive school environment. And for me, it's a journey. We're not there. I'm not there on anything that I do in schools. I suppose when I am there, I should probably retire, because it means I'm just too tired to recognize the areas we need to grow and evolve. But that's my story thus far.
That's beautiful, Mark. Thank you so much. Reward direction, not perfection. Tanya, over to you.
Thank you. So I am the voice of someone who's retired, and I think, looking back, I don't think it's because I was tired. I was tired, but I needed a shift. And I sort of want to start by saying, yeah, thank you to all of you who are still in this role and working in our system. It's incredibly important. The one thing that I wanted just to speak to, when I was looking through the pamphlet and thinking of all these different wonderful aspects that people are sharing about how you support building an inclusive school, because it is so dynamic. There's so many different things we have to think about and juggle and entry places into this. One that really resonates with me that was important in my practice, and certainly even now I get a chance to support schools in talking about this, is the implementation considerations. I think once we start developing shared understanding with a system or a staff, a school, a community about what is someone asked the question, what is inclusion? What is an inclusive school? You know, we start to dig into that, and that's incredibly important. But sometimes we start doing that and we really name, this is what it is, this is what it is, this is what it looks like. We start to understand that a bit more. The piece that I think is often one that we might not stop to reflect about, and I know I've tried my best to think about it, is change management. And I've heard it echo with some other people's comments. Inclusive communities, inclusive schools are about all the people in it. So it certainly is about what happens in classrooms with children. It's also about what happens with all the staff. And it's about what happens broader with our families and broader community for sure. So when we think about change management, it's not just one person who's bringing a school through to become more inclusive. It's everyone. And that's where, again, we paint the picture, but we really need to think of bringing people along in terms of their shared understanding. And again, some of these points are included in the brochure. The piece where you start to dig in and uncover with a group of people about, again, what's the standard? What do we really want here? What's that purpose? I really, really believe that that's something that has to take time, and you do it together. And I believe in my 33 years that almost everyone, if not everyone, comes to this profession, not just as teachers, but support staff and others with a desire to make a difference for children. And when you start digging into the why and the values, you know, I think people naturally resonate to, that makes sense, that I can get behind that. But I think you need to take time to uncover the purpose with a community so that you're not just having this one-off conversation in a staff meeting or in an event about inclusive ed. It starts to be incorporated in the narrative of the school. And so I think that's a big change management thing, that you always do your best to keep it at the forefront and help remind everyone about, oh yeah, that was an example of inclusive ed, and work on that. Another piece is just really understanding that the paradigm shift, and that it isn't easy. Nothing that is really important is easy. So it's psychological safety for staff. And I know I'm talking about the big people, maybe more than the little people, but really creating that place that we can be so reflective on some practices that aren't inclusive. We've all done it, and that's just, I think that's been a barrier. And so when we really are supportive of change management practices, we help people identify that they're here, and that's where they were, but they're going to move here, and making them feel safe in that journey, making them feel very supported in that journey, modeling. I think that school leadership are really good. You know, we're at our best when we can acknowledge, like, I think I just did something that wasn't really inclusive. I just applied a lens with something, and you just saw me do it in front of, you know, in a staff meeting, and I'm acknowledging that I did that and I need to move forward. So I think modeling, paradigm shifting towards a more inclusive school is really, really important. That piece about learning by doing, create that atmosphere and culture that we're going to try something. We're going to try these things. We're going to fail. We're going to fail forward, and we're going to talk about it, and we're going to do better the next time. So yeah, that's my sort of big takeaway for this session, is that we just can't forget how important it is to carry the people along who are really carrying the inclusive school along.
Thank you to all of our colleagues for joining us. Those are great points. And what we wanted to do at this point is to take a couple of minutes to respond to questions that you might have. Gordon is going to monitor the questions, and will pose these questions to any of the folks who are on the call. I know there was a question around ableism, and I think that's a great place for us to start. So maybe Donna, how do you feel about this? Should we just kind of go through questions? We've got a couple of other questions we can ask, but maybe we'll start with a question. There's a question that was raised in the discussion from Lisa. How have you successfully encouraged a shift away from the ableist value framework that's entrenched in schooling culture. The point about everyone having value and adding value is so crucial amidst a curriculum and assessment drenched in skill-based success culture. That's an awesome question. So thank you, Lisa. Does anyone want to take a turn at this question around how do we move away from that ableist framework? Kind of what is the normative, what are the norms in our schools? Maybe I can start, and if anyone wants to jump in, I think there's a couple of things that have been mentioned there in the various aspects of what people have said. I think one is the factor of time. Sometimes we want things to, I think this is to Tanya's comment around change management. Change management does take time. And we have to recognize there are kind of cultural norms. Those cultural norms can exist not just in a broader community or in a school, but they can exist certainly within a class. So we have to be cognizant of the fact that things aren't necessarily going to change quickly. I think there's the idea of persistence is really important there. I think even Lisa, the bringing language into our staff meetings, into our newsletters. What do we mean by neurodiversity? What is ableist? What do we, like, can we use the language like disability, or do we, does the language of exceptionality? So helping to everyone to feel comfortable with being able to raise those questions, and then providing some resources around what is how do we move towards a neurodiversity? Shelley Moore is another great resource. Many of you have used Shelley Moore's bowling analogy and other resources. Bringing those kinds of resources in, I think, can help shift that culture, recognizing that there's still standardization, there's curriculum, there's assessments, but we recognize that at the core of all of this is the child. Anyone want to add to my response on that one?
I'm not sure if this gets at the question, but for me, we spend a lot of time. I know teachers spend a lot of time just celebrating, talking about the diversity that exists inside of the school, and everybody brings something different, and that's where I'm talking about the modalities of support, and I'll tell parents, because I'll hear from parents sometimes, and they'll say, well, I don't want my child accessing that type of support, right? And they have a vision in their mind of when I was a kid and you were being trotted off to segregated or a different location, and it was very obvious that you were quote unquote different. And I spend a lot of time explaining to parents that while I appreciate that and understand that, I try and educate them a little bit on the system's much different now. And we have hundreds of students who access different modalities of support. It's actually normative now, and we try to create that environment inside of the school that we all need something different to succeed. And I'm not sure if that answers the question, but that's certainly a lot of work that's done in classrooms and conversations with families and parents, and trying to tell the story of what support looks like now, and it is different.
I wonder if somebody could link this to the whole question of the 3 tiers, like the 3 tiers of support, or however language you want to use to describe it, the pyramid. It seems to me that there's a difference developing where many people try to fit children into the tiers, like this child's a tier 1, that child's a tier 2, and so on. And then on the flip side, there are people, maybe not as many, who think about the tiers as more about support or intensity of support for children that's pushed in, as opposed to kids getting categorized and receiving some kind of separate tiered support level. Anybody want to comment on that? Like, what's been your experience in processing that in your schools, or Steve and Donna in your research? Seems to me it's a really useful concept if you focus it on support levels, not on a program. Like, as Mark was saying, that it's tier 1's not a program. It's a level of support. Anyone reflect on that?
I can just step in, Gordon, and just say I know that really hits home. It's with like practically the idea of having tiers and support. It just makes so much practical sense, but it is always something to keep at the forefront that we are talking about supports. And not categorically framing students in places that are so static for support. It's about in a fluidity, and a child might need a more intensive support in this category, but not in this. And always that intention, always let's keep them down in universal, everything we do, think about that. But it is a challenge. It's a great way of thinking about dividing how we do our work and support children. But I think the challenge is to not have it locked in around kids and categorically pinning down children in a certain category or tier.
Anybody else?
I'll just say really quickly, we have to be careful that we're not just replacing one form of language with another form of language. So we could see tier 3 or tier 2 as just being congregated or segregated classes, right? And I think that's really, so are we just using fancier, nicer language to do exactly the same thing that we've done for 50 years? I think that's where the caution is as far as what you were saying, Gordon. And think of it like a cascade. Different levels of support modalities, nicely done, Mark, with that comment, that are necessary. It's like Donna with assistive technology, right? Like assistive technology is awesome for everyone. So yeah, I access it at different times and for different purposes and for different reasons. And likewise, accessing supports and programs can be similar to that if done with the proper mindset.
If I could also add, I mean, we also got to be careful that we're not pigeonhole our students according to the tiers, because I've seen situations too where just taking the time to teach the whole class the words or the sounds, the phonemic awareness part of reading will benefit everyone, instead of saying that student needs to go to tier 2 and work on a small group. So I think, we got to be careful with that. But I also find too, is it goes back to, I believe Donna has said earlier on, is having the resources and support there for our teachers. They need to make sure they have the right training and the right resources if they are going to do those good nature principle strategies for tier 1, that's going to benefit everyone. So that sometimes can be a barrier. Right away, we want to put our kids and put in this tier 2 because they think that maybe they'll do better in that level.
Yeah, a couple things, like I would say, as it was Tanya said, like I like the word fluidity. At the school, Dunsmuir, we don't have any kid that would live in any one tier. It's very, very fluid in terms of getting what they need at the time, and it is always the students at the center, and it's a very deliberate decision in terms of what support will be put in place. One thing that comes up every now and then, and I don't know if this might also lend itself to the ableism question, but some things that I've identified that'll get in the way in talking to some parents of students who perhaps they need assistive technology, they need a laptop. But there's a real reluctance to use the laptop as some students, not all, some as they get into middle school, because now they think that others are perceiving them as different. So one thing that I'm trying to do to combat that at the school is support teachers. So assistive technology can be an excellent leverage for us for all students. So we're trying to work as a team with some folks from the inclusive ed department in our school to build a capacity of teachers and actually create some time where they learn how to use this assistive technology. All the students are actually trained in some of the assistive technology. So as an example now, okay, we're working on, whatever it is, and there's a graphic organizer or whatever accompanies it as a handout. A student knows I'm going to go down to the digital hub. I'm going to scan that or take a picture of it. I'm going to upload it into our Google Classrooms. And now we might have 15 kids who choose to work that way. And now we're normalizing these different modes of learning. And that's a good leverage because we're teaching every other student how to use technology in a outside of just TikToking. So.
I'm noting an interest in how principals make teamwork happen to support classroom teachers. Like every school, I think Mark referred to this in his comments earlier. Every school has what are essentially classroom teachers. They go to school in the morning, they spend almost all of their time, other than a maybe preparation period, with students in a class. And then there are other people employed in the school, many of them, most of them teachers, whether it's principals, vice principals, support teachers, resource teachers, special education teachers, guidance counselors, behavior consultants. Like wherever you live, the list may look somewhat different. But what I'm curious about is from our two academics here who from the university and the three principals, what's your experience and what are your thoughts about how a principal needs to and how they can build the kind of teamwork with all those people who can push in support to classroom teachers? And I think it's addressed in our publication, and I'd be interested in your thoughts about what you think makes that work. Giving teachers support that they need when they need it. Donna, you actually referred to that in your opening remarks, that no teacher, and I think that's an essential point, no single teacher knows what they need to do with every challenge that's going to come before them, even in a school day, a school month, or a year. So how do you get that support? And how do principals particularly organize and make sure that support's available?
I'll just speak a little bit on that. I did a workshop out in a First Nations school, not too far from here, a couple of Mondays ago, and everybody was there. The students had the day off, but everybody, including the principal sat there throughout the whole thing. He was a learner in that school. The learning support team were there as well, the two learning support teachers. And it was very interesting. Everybody was really, really motivated. They wanted to learn more. The focus was on universal design for learning. So I spent the morning with the learning support teachers and just talking about, well, what is UDL? And we related it to, our own lives. We have UDL everywhere. It's all around us. We just can't get away from it. But it's there to support us. And we talked about the importance of it and using a UDL approach as a basic way to approach education and to support learning. And then the afternoon was spent with teachers rolling up their sleeves and working together in their teaching teams, by grade level. They could choose who they would work with and support their or develop their lesson plans. Look at a lesson plan and critique it according to UDL. What would you do? What little change would you make? And then we shared. But I was really, really impressed because everybody was there. The other reason why I did it, why I said that I would go in and work with them, is because the EAs were there. It wasn't just the teachers, it was the educational assistants. And that is so rare in many schools, many school districts. For that to happen. So it was absolutely wonderful. And I learned a lot. I learned an awful lot. So I think the principal being present, observing, participating, really understanding who's learning this, who isn't, who's maybe sitting back like this, oh, I can't do that at my grade level, right? And there will be those teachers who are resistant. And who just, may not understand how to do it. And so those are the teachers that need some support. So that's all I have to say about that. I'm sure that Mark and Al and Tanya, if you have anything to add, that would be great.
I think for me.
Sorry, go ahead, Mark.
I think for me, it is a moral imperative to move down the road of inclusion, and I articulate that, so it's being very upfront and transparent with staff. But a few years ago, when I started at this school, we created a group. We invited anybody who wanted to, EAs, teachers, to this group, and it was called titled Opportunities in Diversity. And what we were going to do was do a book club, a study of Shelley Moore's book. I can't remember the title. It was something. It was inclusion something. And what we were going to explore is how we support school staff continue to move down the road of inclusion, right? And we're going to define inclusion as a school, and we were going to do those pieces. So what that is it's an invitation to participate. It's an invitation to be part of the solution. It's an invitation to put a stake in it and have some ownership in it and come aboard. And it's not all roses. There's no question about it. There's as many beliefs in the school as there is personalities, and that's the difficult work that we have to do. But creating that environment, articulating that vision, creating the environment, safe place. And then we do have collaborative team meetings. We meet with EAs once a month, every morning for an hour. We meet, EAs are part of our staff meeting. So we have a whole staff meeting and we try and get collaborative time in those meetings and just creating that culture, but doing it deliberately. There's no question about it, that it needs to be thoughtful and deliberate.
Can I just take a question from the question and answer section here? And I'm going to combine two. It's about parents and their role and how principals can support them. What can a principal do to help support parents who want inclusion in a school where segregated classes still remain? Like what suggestions would you have for how a parent can approach that, and what role can a principal play in helping make that transition happen? And I think in many parts of the country, we need to face it. There are numerous schools where kids with disabilities are offered a segregated program or a self-contained program as the first option. How do principals change that, and how can they support parents to have confidence that that's a good idea? Anybody on our panel? Tanya?
I can jump in quickly. And one thing I will say is that we have to recall and remember and exercise our role as educators and school leaders, that this is a human rights question. And it's, Steve mentioned that earlier, and in all the background, that we have declarations that children have the right to be in community schools and learning environments with their peers, in mixed environments. So I think if we also remember as principals, and again, exercise this, that we operate in different spheres. So we have the school in our control, and what's in our control to maybe change that within a school. You really need to dig deep, but also you operate in a sphere of a bigger system. And so sometimes these are the conversations that you're taking further and really boldly alongside families about that this is a human rights conversation that districts need to listen to. And, so I think that that's something that makes you feel a little bit more confident in going forward and knowing that you're backed up, that this is entrenched that way. And then again, it's also working with parents in a slow way so that they can understand that the typical classroom, the regular classroom, can be a place and should be the place where their children are. And again, that's the thing that takes time. People need to experience that that's okay if they're coming out of a segregated setting. But again, this is a tough one. Like Gordon said, it's all over, and it's really being confronting and understanding that that's a role that we play as school administrators in making sure jurisdictions understand this is a human rights conversation.
Steve, any thoughts from your
I
research?
just put it in the chat. Thomas Ahir's work 5 years ago, massive study, 5 million students, 25 countries, thousands of students, and it 100% supports what Donna was saying earlier. Just keep pointing to the evidence. The evidence says over and over and over again that inclusive education is beneficial for all students, for the students with disabilities, for the students who are without disabilities, for every student. So keep pointing to the evidence. We say we're evidence-based, and that's just that Ahir's work is just, it's a meta study, right? Like it looks at, it's a study of studies. It's the gold standard, and it's pretty convincing.
Okay, our time is winding down. Can we just maybe go around the table? For people listening in, I suggested to our panelists that we imagine we're sitting around a table having a cup of coffee. So if we're doing that and we're getting ready to leave, the coffee's almost gone. How about we go around and see if anybody has one final reflection they'd like to share, focused on principles, providing leadership, transforming schools to become inclusive. And why don't we bookend it with our two university people? So we'll start with Donna.
Oh, I'm first. Okay. Okay. Leadership in the school is critical to supporting effective instructional practices amongst the teachers, so that all students can learn and learn from each other. We're really in there to learn from each other. We learn from the leaders, we learn from each other as teachers, and we learn from the students, and the students are learning from each other as well. It's all learning.
Okay,
Thank you.
How about Al?
First of all, I need to thank each one of you for all the insights. I mean, I've been taking notes here because they serve as reminders too for myself. One thing that resonates with me is, as a principal, you set the tone, and it's almost like your vocation. You have to really believe in it and champion it in everything that you do and say. I'm sure there are barriers, but you have to listen to them. Whether or not it's the parent, the teacher, and try to approach it with the lens of, how can I help? How can I make this work? In the end, it's what's best for the student. And that's why we chose this profession, is to ensure all of our students succeed. And if we approach that lens, that we're going to offer as much support and help, whether or not you're an EA, a teacher, or even a child youth care worker in a school, that's where we're going to see our students succeed.
Okay, thank you. Mark.
Yeah, I think it just goes back to me to engagement, and it's like I tell parents of new students, the grade 5 students, when we meet them in the spring the year before. I tell them communication, transparency is really, really important. And if we have that, I've never encountered a problem that we cannot get through, over top of, underneath, around, whatever that might be. And it's the same with supporting your school and your staff towards inclusion. It's being there, it's being engaged, and it's opening that dialogue so that we can find solutions, not problem solve, but find solutions in the best interest of everybody. My pleasure to be here. Thank you very much.
Okay, Mark, how about you, Tanya? Any final thoughts?
I'm going to put a plug in for leaders' responsibility to really cultivate partner mindset in a school, and leaning into everyone. We're all in the circle, everyone within the school, everyone that supports the school in terms of other districts, ministries, and families. We're all in the same circle, and that's a challenge for us. Sometimes, we start to think that there are sides, and well, there are sides, there's different perspectives for sure, but we really need to lean in and capitalize on working together and being extraordinarily invitational to families for sure.
Okay, and Steve.
Thanks, everyone. Resources are available on the Inclusive Education Canada website. Our research team has a website simply called leadtoinclude.org. You can find literally dozens of resources there, including choose your own adventure, case studies, podcasts, all sorts of resources that are highly accessible. I do a lot of work in Haiti, and this is where I'll leave you with. There's a well-known Haitian proverb. I won't tell it to you in Creole. I'll say it in English, which is simply, little by little, straw by straw, a bird builds its nest. So I will just say, we as leaders, teachers, the full staff, everyone, families, students, for sure, we build the nest together.
Okay, well, I want to thank our panelists for joining us today, and thank everyone for tuning in. Remind you that Inclusive Education Canada has a website. You can follow us there. New website to follow soon. And I also want to just note that for those of you who are interested, Bill C-35, focused on early learning and childcare in Canada, is now in the final consideration phase in the Senate. And it does not effectively address inclusion or provision for kids with special needs or disabilities. And if you want to communicate with your senator or follow up in any way you think appropriate, there's a link that I posted in the comments section that you can follow up with. So there's a struggle at all levels to try to make our society more inclusive, and we want to work to make our schools more inclusive. Thank you for joining us, and we'll see you next time. Bye-bye.